"Please don't kick me, I'm already hurt," cried the waitress. Then the undercover CEO did this. What if a single moment of cruelty could become the catalyst for the most beautiful change in someone's life? Amara Vey pressed her back against the cold brick wall behind the Junction Café, her uniform still damp from the coffee a customer had deliberately spilled on her just minutes before. Her rich brown skin was still flushed with humiliation, and she could feel the heat radiating from the burns on her forearm. At 34, she'd grown used to invisible bruises, the kind that came from working 3 jobs to keep her 8-year-old son fed and housed. Her hands shook as she wiped away tears, not from the burns on her arm, but from the customer's final words. "Maybe if you weren't so clumsy, you wouldn't be stuck serving people like me." The night air was cold against her face, and she could hear the distant sound of traffic on the highway. She thought about Elior, her son, waiting for her at their neighbor Mrs. Patterson's apartment. He'd be doing his homework at the kitchen table, probably hungry, definitely tired. She thought about the electricity bill sitting unopened on her counter, the notice from his school about the field trip she couldn't afford, the hole in his only pair of good shoes that she'd been trying to patch for weeks. She didn't know that inside the diner, a man in faded jeans and a simple button-down shirt had witnessed everything. Kairo Wynn, a tall black man with salt and pepper locks tied back neatly, worth more than most small countries, had been sitting quietly in the corner booth. But what he'd just seen made his chest tighten with something he hadn't felt in years, righteous anger mixed with profound sadness. He'd watched this woman serve with grace and kindness for weeks, and tonight he'd seen that grace tested beyond what anyone should have to endure. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Amara had been working at the Junction Café for 8 months, ever since the factory where she'd assembled car parts for 6 years had closed down. She still remembered that day, the plant manager calling everyone to the floor, the announcement that operations were moving overseas, the looks of devastation on her coworkers' faces. She'd been good at that job, fast and precise, and it had paid $15 an hour with benefits. Losing it had felt like the ground disappearing beneath her feet. The job at the cafe barely covered rent on the tiny apartment she shared with Elior. But it was honest work, and she'd learned long ago to find dignity in any labor that put food on their table. Her mother had taught her that before she passed, to hold her head high no matter what work her hands were doing. "Baby," her mama used to say, "there's no shame in any honest work. The shame is in how people treat those who serve them." Most customers were kind enough, tired truckers who left decent tips, elderly couples who smiled when she refilled their coffee, young families who appreciated her patience when their children made messes. But lately, there'd been more difficult ones, people who seemed to take pleasure in reminding her of her place. Amara had noticed it was often when customers saw her dark skin, her tightly coiled hair pulled back in a practical bun, her tired eyes that revealed too much about her struggles. Some people seemed to look right through her, as if she were part of the furniture, rather than a human being with dreams and fears. She'd developed a thick skin over the years, learning to smile through dismissive comments, to move past tables where people would quiet their conversations as if she might steal their words along with their dirty dishes. But some days like today when Elior had cried because the other kids made fun of his worn-out clothes, when the check engine light came on in her 20-year-old car, when her body ached from standing for 8 hours straight, the armor felt thinner. Cairo had started coming to the Junction Café 3 weeks ago, always ordering the same thing, black coffee and whatever pie was fresh that day. He dressed simply, drove an older pickup truck, and spoke softly when he ordered. His deep voice was gentle, respectful. Amara had pegged him as another working man, maybe a contractor or mechanic, someone who understood the value of $1. She'd noticed his calloused hands, the way he always said, "please" and "thank you," how he'd quietly leave a $20 bill for a $12 meal. She'd also noticed the intelligence in his dark brown eyes, the way he seemed to observe everything around him with careful attention. What she particularly remembered was the day she'd accidentally brought him apple pie instead of pecan. She'd been flustered, juggling too many tables because another waitress had called in sick. She'd apologized profusely, ready to rush back to fix her mistake, but he'd just smiled warmly and said, "Apple pie sounds perfect. Thank you, Amara." The kindness in his voice had almost brought tears to her eyes. What Amara didn't know was that Cairo had been visiting diners and restaurants across the country for months, not as the CEO of Wynn Collective, but as a man trying to understand the businesses he was considering acquiring. His company specialized in turning struggling establishments into thriving community centers, particularly in black and brown neighborhoods that had been overlooked by other investors. But he'd learned years ago that spreadsheets couldn't tell him what he really needed to know about a place. He had to feel it. See how people treated each other when they thought no one important was watching. See who had the heart and the strength to lead with compassion even under pressure. His own journey had taught him that. Cairo had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta with his mother and 3 siblings. His mother, Dorothy Wynn, had worked as a hotel housekeeper during the day, cleaned office buildings at night, and took in sewing on weekends. He'd watched her leave before dawn and return after dark, her hands raw and her feet swollen, but she'd never complained. She'd made sure her children had what they needed, even if it meant she went without. "Education is your way out," she'd told him countless times, pressing her hard-earned money into his hand for books, for fees, for the things he needed to succeed. She'd lived to see him graduate from business school, but had passed away before seeing the empire he'd built. Everything he did now, he did with her memory guiding him. The customer who'd humiliated Amara was a regular named Trent Halden, a middle-aged white man who seemed to enjoy making the staff uncomfortable. Cairo had watched this pattern for weeks. The deliberately spilled drinks, the snide comments about Amara's appearance, the way Trent would leave exact change, no tip, after making her clean up messes he'd created on purpose. Each incident had made Cairo's jaw clench a little tighter. But tonight had crossed a line. Trent had accidentally knocked over his coffee cup, just as Amara reached the table, causing the hot liquid to splash across her arm. When she'd gasped in pain, he'd laughed and made a comment about her being clumsy and careless, just like you'd expect. The racial undertone hadn't been lost on anyone in the diner, but no one had said anything. They never did. Cairo had seen the way Amara's shoulders had tensed, the way she'd bitten her lip to keep from crying out, the way she'd apologized for his deliberate cruelty. He'd watched her excuse herself and rush toward the back door, and something in him had snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. This was his moment. This was why he'd been coming here, watching, waiting. As Amara stepped back inside, trying to compose herself, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, Trent was already gesturing impatiently for more coffee. "Hurry up," he called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "And try not to spill it this time, though I suppose that's asking too much." The few other customers in the diner looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. An older black couple in the corner booth looked down at their plates. A young mother with 2 children gathered her kids closer, as if trying to make them invisible. A truck driver at the counter gripped his coffee cup tighter but stayed silent. That's when Cairo quietly stood up from his corner booth, his decision already made. His 6'3" frame unfolded with quiet dignity, and he rolled his shoulders back, a gesture that reminded him of his own father, a man who had worked 3 jobs to put Cairo through college before a heart attack took him too young. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Cairo walked slowly toward Trent's table, his footsteps deliberate and calm. Amara was already approaching with a coffee pot, her shoulders tense with anxiety, her face carefully neutral in the way she'd learned to make herself small and unnoticeable. She'd developed this survival skill over years of navigating spaces where her presence seemed to make some people uncomfortable. Trent looked up at Cairo with annoyance, clearly not expecting to be interrupted. "What do you want? I'm trying to get some service here." "I've been watching you," Cairo said quietly, his voice carrying a strength that made the entire diner go silent. "For weeks, I've watched you treat this woman with complete disrespect." His tone wasn't angry. It was something deeper, the kind of controlled disappointment that cut through noise better than any shout, the kind of voice that came from a man who had learned to command rooms full of executives, but who had never forgotten where he came from. Trent's face reddened. "Mind your own business, pal. If she can't handle the job, maybe she should find another one." He turned to Amara, who stood frozen with the coffee pot, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and surprise. "Well, are you going to pour or not?" Amara's hands trembled as she began to tilt the pot. She'd endured this treatment because she needed this job desperately. Her son's school had sent home another notice about overdue lunch money just yesterday. The electric bill was past due. The landlord had already warned her once about late rent. She couldn't afford to lose even one day's pay. Elior was counting on her. He was always counting on her, and she couldn't let him down. But as she started to pour, Cairo gently placed his hand over the cup. "No," he said simply, his voice firm but kind. "Amara, you don't need to serve someone who treats you like you're less than human." The sound of her name spoken with such respect made Amara's throat tighten with emotion. When was the last time someone had defended her like this? When was the last time anyone had seen her pain and stepped in to stop it? Cairo looked directly at Trent, his gaze steady and unwavering. "And you need to understand something. Every person in this diner has a story, has people who love them, has dreams and struggles, just like you do. The difference is, most of us don't use our pain as an excuse to hurt others. Whatever makes you feel like you need to diminish someone else to feel big, that's something you need to work on, but you're not going to do it at this woman's expense. Not anymore." Trent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Who the hell do you think you are talking to me like that? You're just some blue-collar nobody. You don't know who I am." Cairo's expression remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes, a flash of steel beneath the gentleness. "Maybe I am," he said evenly. "But I know the difference between a man and a bully. I know the difference between someone who builds others up and someone who tears them down to feel powerful." He reached into his wallet and placed a $100 bill on Trent's table. "Your meals are covered for the next month, but here's the deal. You're going to start treating every person who works here with respect, real respect, or you're going to find somewhere else to eat. Your choice." The diner remained completely silent. Even Marceline Dupré, the diner's owner, a stout black woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, had emerged from the kitchen, her wooden spoon still in hand, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. In 20 years of running this place, she'd never seen anyone stand up to a customer like this. Amara felt tears welling up again, but this time they weren't from humiliation. She'd never had anyone stand up for her like this, defend her dignity when she couldn't defend it herself. Her vision blurred as she looked at this quiet man who had seen her, really seen her, as a person worthy of respect and protection. Trent, clearly shaken and embarrassed by the attention of everyone in the diner, threw some money on the table and stormed out, muttering under his breath about people who don't know their place. The door swung shut behind him with a decisive bang. But Cairo wasn't finished yet. He turned to the other customers in the diner, his voice still calm but carrying clearly. "I apologize for the disturbance, but I think we all need to remember that how we treat people, especially people who serve us, says everything about who we are. It says nothing about them and everything about us." As the diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the low murmur of conversation resuming, several customers made it a point to smile at Amara, to thank her more warmly when she refilled their coffee. The older couple in the corner booth called her over and left her a $20 tip on their $15 meal. Amara realized her hands were still shaking. She set the coffee pot down carefully on the nearest table and looked at Cairo with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I could have handled it. I've dealt with worse." Cairo's expression softened, and for the first time she saw him smile, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "I know you could have. You've been handling it for weeks. But just because you can endure something doesn't mean you should have to. Just because you're strong enough to carry a burden doesn't mean someone shouldn't help you set it down." He gestured toward the booth where he'd been sitting. "Could we talk for a few minutes?" Amara glanced toward the kitchen where Marceline was pretending not to watch while flipping burgers on the grill. The older woman gave her a small nod of approval, a slight smile playing at her lips. The dinner rush was over, and the few remaining customers seemed content to linger over their coffee and pie. She followed Cairo to his booth, sliding into the seat across from him. Up close, she could see the laugh lines around his eyes, the gray threaded through his locks, the weariness that came from carrying heavy responsibilities. But she could also see kindness there, genuine warmth that put her at ease despite her nervousness. "I'm Cairo," he said, extending his hand across the table, "and I owe you an apology." "An apology for what?" Amara asked, confused as she shook his hand. His grip was warm and steady, the handshake of someone who meant what they said. You stood up for me. No one's done that in, I can't remember how long. For sitting here for 3 weeks, watching that man disrespect you and not saying anything until tonight." Cairo's voice carried genuine regret. "I've been coming here to understand this place better. I'm in the restaurant business, and I was considering making an offer to buy the Junction Café." Amara's heart sank like a stone. Another corporate buyer. Another business that would probably close within months, leaving her jobless again. She'd seen it happen too many times in her neighborhood. Someone promising to revitalize things, only to shut down and sell the property for development. The grocery store where she'd worked in high school. The community center where Elior used to go for after-school programs. The bookstore her mother had loved. All gone, replaced by luxury condos or chain stores. "Oh," she said quietly, her voice flat, trying to hide her disappointment. She started to slide out of the booth. "Well, I should get back to work while I still have a job." "Wait, please," Cairo said quickly. "What I've learned here isn't in any business plan. I've watched you work 3 different shifts, cover for other employees when they're sick, and treat every customer with kindness, even when they don't deserve it. You remember how people like their coffee. You check on the elderly customers to make sure they're okay. You know the names of the regulars' grandchildren. Last week, I saw you pay for a homeless man's meal out of your own tips, and you do all of this while dealing with your own struggles." "How do you know about my struggles?" Amara asked, defensive, pulling back slightly. Had he been investigating her? The thought made her uncomfortable. "Because I recognize them," Cairo said gently. "I grew up in a house where my mother worked 3 jobs, just like you do. I've seen that look in someone's eyes when they're counting every dollar, when they're exhausted but can't afford to rest. My mama used to come home so tired she'd fall asleep at the kitchen table while helping me with homework. I'd wake up in the morning and find her there, her head on my math book, still in her work uniform." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "I watched her sacrifice everything to give me opportunities she never had. She worked herself into an early grave to make sure I could have a different life. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments." Then he continued, his gaze focusing back on Amara with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What if I told you that you've already proven everything you need to prove? That watching you work has taught me more about leadership and dignity than any business school ever could, than any boardroom ever has." Amara stared at Cairo, trying to process what he was telling her. I don't understand. What do you mean you're in the restaurant business? Are you a manager somewhere? Cairo reached into his wallet again, but this time he pulled out a simple business card. The cardstock was heavy, expensive, with elegant raised lettering. Amara read it twice before the words sank in. Kairo Wynn, CEO, Wynn Collective. She looked up at him with wide eyes, then back down at the card, then up at him again. You're a CEO? Like I'm a real CEO? I'm someone who believes that the best businesses are built on treating people right, Cairo said simply, and you've shown me exactly what that looks like. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the table. Amara, I want to buy this diner, but I want to do it the right way. I want to turn it into something that honors the community it serves. Something that creates opportunity, that builds people up instead of using them up. And I want you to help me do it. Actually, I need you to help me do it. I don't know anything about running a business, Amara protested, shaking her head. I didn't even finish college. I had to drop out when I got pregnant with Elior. I was 2 semesters away from a degree in hospitality management, but then life happened. His father left, my mother got sick, and I had to work. I'm just a waitress. But Cairo shook his head firmly. You're not just anything, and you know everything about what matters. You know how to make people feel welcome, how to work hard, how to care about others even when you're struggling yourself. You know this community. You understand what people need because you've lived it. That degree you didn't finish? You've been earning the real-world equivalent every single day. His voice grew more earnest, more passionate. I'm offering you a partnership, Amara. Not just a job, a real stake in making this place everything it could be. I'll handle the business side, the financing, the legal stuff, the things you can learn as we go, but I need someone who has the heart to lead with compassion, someone who sees people, really sees them. Someone who knows what this community needs because she's part of it. Amara felt her world shifting beneath her feet, like standing on ice that was beginning to crack. I can't. I have a son, and I'm nobody. People like me don't get opportunities like this. There has to be someone more qualified. Your son is exactly why this could work, Cairo said gently. Every decision we make will be about creating the kind of place where families like yours can thrive. Better wages, healthcare, profit sharing, college funds for employees' children, flexible schedules so parents can go to their kids' school events. A business model that values people over pure profit. He paused, letting that sink in. I've been looking for someone who understands what it means to build something real, something that matters to real people. Watching you work these past weeks, seeing how you treat people, how you never give up, how you lead by example even though you don't have the title, that's exactly what I've been searching for. Tears started flowing down Amara's cheeks, hot against her skin. But for the first time in months, they were tears of hope rather than despair. Why me? She whispered, her voice breaking. You could have anyone. Someone with experience, with education, with credentials. Because anyone can manage numbers on a spreadsheet, Cairo replied, his voice soft but certain. But not everyone has a heart that sees people the way you do. Not everyone understands that the most important part of any business is how it makes people feel about themselves when they walk through the door and when they leave. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. Amara, what would you say if I told you that in 6 months you could be the general manager of the finest community restaurant in 3 states? What would you say if I told you that your life could be completely different? That Elior's life could be different? Amara couldn't speak. She could only nod through her tears. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. 6 months later, Amara stood in the completely renovated dining room of what was now called Amara's Hearth, watching her 8-year-old son, Elior, carefully arrange fresh flowers on each table. The transformation had been beyond anything she could have imagined. The old vinyl booths had been replaced with comfortable seating upholstered in warm earth tones, burnt orange, deep brown, golden yellow. The harsh fluorescent lights had given way to soft, welcoming fixtures that cast a golden glow over everything, making everyone's skin look beautiful and healthy. The walls now displayed artwork from local black artists, including a beautiful painting Elior had created of the restaurant's new garden, a burst of sunflowers and tomato plants that the community had helped plant in the spring. The old, cracked linoleum had been replaced with warm wooden floors. There was a community bulletin board near the entrance covered with job postings, advertisements for local services, photos of neighborhood kids who'd made honor roll. A bookshelf stood in one corner with free books people could borrow or trade. Everything about the space said, "You belong here." But the real changes went far deeper than decoration. Every employee now earned a living wage, $22 an hour to start, plus healthcare benefits and retirement contributions. The staff included 2 other single mothers who'd been struggling to make ends meet, a retired teacher named Mr. Washington, who wanted part-time work to stay active, and 3 teenagers saving for college with the help of the restaurant's education fund, which matched their savings dollar for dollar. Amara had discovered she had a natural gift for organizing, training, and inspiring others, skills that Cairo had recognized in her long before she'd seen them in herself. She'd taken online business courses in the evenings, with Cairo mentoring her through each module. She'd learned about inventory management, food costs, employee scheduling, health regulations. But more importantly, she'd learned to trust her instincts about people and community. Marceline Dupré had stayed on as head cook and part owner, her traditional recipes now complemented by seasonal specials that Amara had developed by listening to customers' stories about their grandmother's cooking. The menu featured Southern classics, perfectly seasoned fried chicken with a crispy crust that shattered when you bit into it, collard greens simmered for hours with smoked turkey and a touch of apple cider vinegar, mac and cheese that made people close their eyes in bliss with its perfect blend of sharp cheddar and creamy Gruyere, and sweet potato pie that had people lining up on Sundays. But they'd also added healthier options based on community feedback: grilled fish with roasted vegetables, fresh salads with produce from local gardens, vegetarian soul food options. Everything was made from scratch with love and attention. The restaurant had become exactly what Cairo had envisioned, a true community center where people came not just for food, but for connection. The customer board by the entrance was filled with thank you notes, job postings, and offers of help from neighbors. "Need a ride to doctor's appointment," one note read. "Can provide childcare Tuesday evenings," read another. "Free tutoring in math for middle schoolers." Amara had started a program where customers could buy meals for those in need, no questions asked. The Wall of Kindness, as Elior had named it, never stayed empty for long. People would purchase meal vouchers and pin them to the board, and anyone who needed a meal could simply take one and order. No shame, no judgment. Last month, they'd served over 100 free meals this way. Every Sunday, they hosted a community breakfast where kids ate free and local organizations could set up information tables. The church down the street held their youth group meetings in the private dining room on Wednesday nights. The local NAACP chapter met there monthly. Job skills workshops happened every other Saturday. Cairo still came by regularly, though now he sat at the counter and let Amara serve him coffee while they discussed expansion plans. 3 other communities had already inquired about opening their own Amara's Hearth locations, each one to be run by someone with Amara's heart for service and understanding of what it meant to struggle. Cairo was determined to create a model that could be replicated, that could transform communities across the country. As Amara watched Elior help seat an elderly couple at their favorite table by the window, her heart swelled with pride and gratitude. Her son was thriving now, confident, happy, secure. He'd joined the school band, and was learning trumpet. He'd made the honor roll last quarter. He talked about going to college someday, maybe becoming a chef or a business owner like his mom. She remembered that night 6 months ago, when she'd stood outside in the cold, feeling invisible and defeated, believing she would never be more than tired and struggling. She thought about how one person's willingness to see her dignity had changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who walked through these doors. Trent Halden had never returned to the restaurant, but Amara often wondered if he'd learned something that night too. She hoped he had. She'd discovered that carrying resentment was too heavy a burden when there was so much joy to be found in building something beautiful. Cairo appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee in the special mugs they'd had made with the restaurant's logo. "Penny for your thoughts," he asked, his familiar warm smile creasing his face. "Just thinking about how everything can change in a moment," Amara said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "How one person choosing kindness can create ripples that reach further than they'll ever know. How you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." "That's what you do every day," Cairo replied. "You create those ripples. You see potential in people. Look at your staff. Every single person here is thriving because you believed in them." Amara smiled, watching Elior laugh as he brought crayons to a little girl at one of the tables. Her son no longer worried about lunch money or worn-out shoes. He had new clothes that fit. He was thriving in school, his teachers amazed at his transformation now that he wasn't carrying the weight of his mother's stress. He had health insurance and had finally gotten glasses he needed. He was just a kid now, allowed to be a kid. "I never thanked you properly," Amara said, turning to face Cairo. "For seeing me when I felt invisible. For believing I could be more than I believed I could be. For changing my life and my son's life." Cairo shook his head gently. "I didn't make you into anything you weren't already, Amara. I just gave you the opportunity to show the world what I could already see. You did all the hard work. You took the risk. You believed when it would have been easier to say no." "We should talk about Detroit," Amara said, shifting into business mode the way she'd learned to do. "The community center there reached out again. They're serious about wanting a location." "What do you think?" Cairo asked. "You're the expert now." Amara pulled out her phone, showing him notes she'd made. "I think we need to find someone like me, someone local who knows the community, who's been struggling but has a servant's heart, someone who needs a chance." Cairo grinned. "See? That's exactly why this works. You understand the model better than I ever could." As they talked strategy, other customers greeted Amara warmly. She knew their names, their stories, their favorite meals. She knew that Mr. Johnson's wife had just beaten cancer. She knew that the Martinez family's daughter had just gotten accepted to college. She knew that young Marcus in the corner was studying for his GED. This was what success looked like, she realized. Not just profit margins and growth projections, but lives changed, community strengthened, hope restored. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of how ordinary people create extraordinary change. Thank you for joining us on Amara's journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply see each other's humanity and choose kindness even when, especially when, no one's watching.